Hello Internet, my name is the Golden Stalfos, and today we're going to talk about Shadow of the Colossus. Now, most people remember Shadow of the Colossus as a brilliant landmark game in gaming history, and I just played it for the first time. I was a Nintendo kid. I did have a PS3 later on, but I didn't really have that many games for it. And while I've heard everyone talk about Shadow of the Colossus over and over and over again, it kind of made me not want to play it because I knew everything there was to know about it. Like, yeah, it's a deep introspective story with, like, morality and shit, okay? And I get that, games that exist to tell a story are kind of few and far between these days, and even at the time, this was pretty big in terms of the way it was telling the story. But if you know the story, you know the story, and it doesn't really matter if you've played it yourself or not. However, I recently decided to play it, and I gotta be honest, I get what people are saying about the story and the atmosphere and all that shit, but like the game itself is bad. Like so bad that I wonder why anyone played it and enjoyed it. It just makes me think, who fucking started up this game and felt this janky ass fucking nonsense camera and thought, yeah, this is good. I like this. What? How? Now, full disclosure, I'm playing the PS3 version of the game because it claimed to be HD and I can do it through the emulate on my computer. And I'm playing it with post processing and upscaling and shit to try and make it look better, and it still looks kind of like ass. Like, I get it's an early PS2 title and they didn't redo the textures for the PS3 port, they just kind of upscaled it, so it makes sense that it looks a little bit ass, but it looks a little ass. I mean, it's atmospheric, and you can tell that a lot of effort was put into the terrain and modeling the ruins and shit, and there clearly was effort put into the visuals in certain places, but it's just low res and covered in a Gaussian blur everywhere, and part of it is probably just the fact that the camera is constantly fighting you and that there's a ridiculous amount of camera motion blur. But even with modern hardware doing upscaling and post-processing stuff, it just doesn't look very good. I assume the PS4 port looks a lot better because it was actually redone textures, but yikes. And aside from the camera, the controls are kind of garbage in general, right? I can't stress enough that the camera just doesn't move the way you want it to. It doesn't really stay behind you, and you don't move relative to the camera. You move relative to whatever direction you're facing, regardless of how you turn the camera around you. And also, the camera doesn't want to stay where you put it. Like, you'll rotate the camera to get a good look at something, and then it'll just snap back to a position that is just staring at a wall, and I get that it's trying to be cinematic and it wants to default to certain positions to arrange these cool shots or whatever, but it just doesn't work in this free roaming open area thing. It just feels janky and shitty, and the camera is fighting against being where I want it to be. It also just doesn't feel very good to move the camera around, again, because there's far too much camera motion blur. It's so excessive. And that, combined with the fact that the character doesn't move relative to the camera, makes it just feel like you have no control over where you're going or where you're looking. And every 10 seconds, you have to just completely stop and remind yourself how ass these controls are and completely intentionally adjust your movement to the assness of these controls. Kind of in the same vein, and possibly a contributing factor, is the fact that your character's movements, especially on the horse, look awful. The way the horse's hooves are animated, they just clip through their legs and shit, and it's bad. And the jankiness of how it looks kind of affects how it feels to move around. Because when you press the button to make yourself move, what you see on the screen looks a little bit janky, and so it feels like your movements are a little bit janky, even if the movement itself is fine. Overall, the button mapping is bad. You can remap things, but why do you have a dedicated call horse button when the horse just walks over to you anyway, and calling it doesn't make it walk over to you? What is that for? Or like, you have a joystick to move the camera around, and yet 3 of your shoulder buttons try to fuck with the camera in some way. Why? What is that for? Stop it. They make you jump with triangle because what? Why? I mean, I know some PlayStation games really want you to use triangle as your interact button for some reason, but like it's so far away from the joystick that it's just really annoying to use. And like I always try to press X to jump instead and end up calling the horse. It's so fucking dumb. If you're using your bow and arrow to shoot down fruit, then every time you go pick up a fruit, you have to re-equip the bow because it just defaults back to the sword after the picking up animation, because fuck you. The hitboxes on basically everything are not what they look like they should be based on the animation of the objects. And your arrows don't really fly directly on the center of the dot, even though you have like an aiming dot. So, like they fly closer to the center the longer you hold down the button, but even if you hold down the button the maximum amount of time, sometimes they'll just go off a little bit, and it's bad. And also there's not really a whole lot to interact with. You can wander around the empty space. You can shoot the 3 things that you're allowed to shoot in the environment when they show up very seldomly, and you can rest at save points. And that's it. Other than that, you can climb the colossi when you're fighting the colossi, and that's it. There's no nothing. There's nothing. There's no interesting ways to move around. There's no way to learn about the lore of the ruins you're exploring. There's no way to like do anything in the game when you're not hunting colossi. They built this whole intricate climbing system and all of these huge environments with ancient crumbling ruins and shit, and they didn't think, hey, maybe let people climb around the ruins and explore shit and maybe find collectibles or something. I don't know, maybe they thought that would interfere with the atmosphere, but then again, like, every time I come across one of your save point shrines and shoot a glowy lizard, that's the same thing. I'm collecting a collectible. According to the internet, there are some more interactive tools that you can unlock after you've beaten the game once and then beat a bunch of time trial things. But, like, why? Like, it's cool that you have bonuses that are in New Game Plus and in time trials and shit. Like, sure, cool. But why isn't there any extra shit to interact with in the base game? I mean, yes, having new stuff in NG Plus and new rewards for challenges is cool, but it kind of doesn't matter if I'm not compelled to complete those challenges because I'm so bored and frustrated from the lack of shit to do in the first playthrough. And that's the thing, like, running around this game just feels kind of boring. If it wasn't for the reputation of this game, I probably wouldn't keep playing it. Like, yeah, I get the atmosphere and the story and all that, and like it's there, but that's the only thing that's there. You go up to a colossi and it's just in this little pre-built arena, and you automatically know what the solution to the puzzle is, and you just have to fight the controls until it lets you solve the puzzle. And then even after you've solved the puzzle, you have to hit the win button like 6 times because you can't just get to the end of the puzzle and then be done with it. And that's all these bosses are. They're not enemies, they're platforming puzzles. They just happen to move and stuff. And quite frankly, like, platforming puzzles are kind of fun. And like, I guess you can build a game around 16 platforming puzzles and call it a day. Like, sure. But, if someone did that, if someone made a game that was just a bunch of platforming puzzles back to back, it wouldn't get the popularity that Shadow of the Colossus got. And it would probably have better controls. It's also worth noting that the game designers built a ton of open terrain that you can just run around and explore and like connects you to the various colossi locations, but none of the colossi are ever in those big open areas. They're always in their own little arenas off in one corner or whatever. All of their arenas are little caves and enclaves in the map that don't interact with the wide open spaces you're normally running around in. It just feels like if you just had all of the Colossi arenas, the map would be 1/10 as big as it is, and the rest of that space isn't being used for anything. Like, sure, there's some value to having empty space for like the atmosphere and shit, but you don't need that much extra, especially considering how fucking long it takes you to cross all of this empty space. It just, ugh. It's also worth noting that it's pretty easy to get into a Colossi arena before you're supposed to fight that specific Colossi, and when you do, the Colossi isn't there. People talk about this game's narrative as if, it's this big tragedy that you're just going out and slaying these majestic beasts that are just living in the world, but like, not really, because they don't show up until you get to their things after Dorman has told you to go to their thing. So it's more like you go to a place, then Dorman summons a monster for you to fight so that you can absorb its essence and awaken him. And there's no sad tragedy there. That's just your Dorman's errand boy, and he's hitting you with a challenge at a pre-arranged time and place. It's not like you can stumble across these things before he tells you about them. You can go into the arena where the Colossi will be, and it's empty. There's no Colossi. And it sucks. It makes the world feel empty and pointless, and there's no benefit to exploring because you just have to get there when Dorman tells you to get there. It doesn't feel like you're an intrepid explorer destroying ancient beasts. It feels like you're an errand boy being tested by a weird fucked up deity until finally you die. Is that a fair reading of the events? I don't know. But that's how it feels. All in all, I would say Shadow of Colossus isn't very fun. There's a lot of atmosphere and storytelling and ooh, but at the end of the day, you're running across a bunch of empty terrain to get to a bunch of platforming puzzles that make you wait through animations until you can press the win button, and then do it over and over again until they actually accept that you've pressed the win button. And to me, that just isn't super fun. Maybe the game just hasn't aged well, or maybe I've just played so many other better games about hunting giant monsters, but, there isn't that much to it. If you want the experience of fighting colossal beasts beyond human imagining, then, play fucking Monster Hunter or God of War or fucking Dark Souls. Like, all of those games have better cameras and other shit to interact with when you're not fighting the god monsters, and mechanics to learn about and implement and shit going on. And sure, all of those games are newer than Shadow of the Colossus, except maybe Monster Hunter 1. But it's not like Shadow of the Colossus invented the idea of giant monsters, Like, fucking Godzilla came out decades before that shit. Hell, you can play Godzilla games. I mean, it's not like a tiny person fighting giant monsters so much as it is giant monsters fighting each other, but still. I don't know, overall, it feels like the only thing this game really has going for it is the spectacle of the specific giant monsters that they made. And while they are very unique and interesting to look at, I need more than that from a game, especially a game with such low quality graphics. Maybe I would feel differently about it if I didn't already know the story before going in, but I don't know. There are lots of games that I do know the story of, and I can play them and have a lot of fun with it. Like nowadays when I replay Resident Evil 4, I don't even play the cutscenes. And I know the story of Ico going in, and Ico is also all a bunch of platforming puzzles with occasionally swinging a stick at enemies that just feels really bad. But I don't have the same problems with Ico. Even though it has most of the same issues, it feels more intentional, and it feels like they were trying to use this stuff. And Shadow of the Colossus just feels like a bunch of missed potential. It feels like a bunch of things they could have done with the game but didn't. And I don't know. So yeah, let me know in the comments. Is my gamer card revoked because I don't worship the masterpiece? I'll see you in the next life. Laters. Hey, Endcard here. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Like, seriously though, please subscribe. I have no subscribers. It's sad. If you want to find me on other social media stuff, you can do that at the Golden Stalfos on basically everything. Links to that are in the description, as well as to some charities I like but am obviously not affiliated with. I also have a Patreon if you like me so much that you want to give me money, though obviously only do that if you have money to burn, And if you do have money to burn, they're the charities I mentioned before. They probably need it more than I do. Mad ups to my girlfriend for doing all the editing for these videos. It's a really big help. Oh, and I occasionally stream on Twitch, so follow me there so you don't miss it. I don't have a formal schedule because when I tried to have a formal schedule, I couldn't keep to it. So, oh well. Okay, thanks. Bye.